Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marudastunnanti Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapada Kramopanishadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We are discussing the Bhashyam on the 21st verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The verse is Veda Vinashinam Nityam Ya Enam Ajamavyayam Kadham Sapurusha Partha Kam Ghatayati Kanti Kam. So Bhashyakara has already established Sarva Karma Nishedasya Udaharanartham Harana Kriya Nishedha. That is the avikriyatva, the immutability, the unchangeability, the unchanging nature of Atman has already been established as a sufficient reason for the absence of all karmas. So the discussion continues. Here Purvapakshi, of course we discussed this. Purvapakshi is asking one question. Satyam ukto nadu sa karana visheshaha anyatva vidushaha avikriyatva atmana iti nahi avikriyam sthanum vidadavataha karma na sambhavati iti ched. So the question is this: just because a vidwan realizes Atman, it doesn't mean that the avikriyatvam, the immutability or the absence of all actions associated with Atman should also be attributed to the knower of Atman. You may see a pillar, an iron pillar or a post or a wall which is static, which doesn't move, which doesn't do anything. But a person who sees that object doesn't become static. That's a Purvapakshi. So Siddhanta says it is totally different. Because when we realize Atman, we are realizing that our true nature is Atman. When a person sees a pillar or a post, there is always a difference between the knower or the seer, the perceiver, and object seen or perceived. Because that experience belongs to the empirical plane. But as a result of Karma Yoga, Chitta Shuddhi, and Jnana Prapti, when we realize that our true nature is Atman, which is avikriya, which is beyond all actions, we do not see a difference between what we realize and ourselves, because we are realizing our own true nature. We are realizing the truth that we are not different from Atman. We are realizing our identity with Atman. So the realization at the spiritual plane, Yat Sakshat Aparokshat Brahma, that realization, which is Aparoksha Anubhuti, is totally different from any kind of experiences at the empirical world, like seeing a sthanu, a pillar or a post or anything. So the Purvapakshi's argument is refuted. The discussion continues. Na vidushaga atmatva na dekadi sanghadasya vidyutta. Now here it is the enlightened, the spiritually advanced person who realizes his total identity is non-distinction, is non-difference with Atman. He is the one who gets this enlightenment or knowledge, the vidyutta. It is not dehadi sankhata. The deha, which is endowed with sharira, indriya, prana, mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankara, all these different senses of perception, jnanendriyani, and senses of action, karmendriyani, then prana, etc. This psychophysical mechanism doesn't get realization. So the realization happens only to something which is beyond, which is different from this psychophysical mechanism, different from this Dekadi Sankhata. That's why other Parisheshya we already discussed here. Through the law of exclusion, through Parisheshya Nyaya, we come to the conclusion that Asamkhata Atma Vidwan Avikriyiti. It is this Atman which is not the same, as the body, mind or intellect, which is totally different and distinct from Dekadi Sankhata, which gets the realization. Tasya Vidushaka Karma Asambhavat Akshepo Yuktaha. Because the Vidwan realizes that his true nature is Atman. Atma is that is Atmavit Atmaiva Bhavadi, Brahmavit Brahmaiva Bhavadi. A Brahmajnani realizes his non-distinction from Brahman. When we realize Brahman, what we are realizing is, what we are trying to understand is ourselves. It is an inner journey in search of our own identity. We come to the realization that the seeker is the same as the reality that is sought. The investigator is the same as the reality which is investigated into. The perceiver and the perceiver are the same. Therefore, Akshebo Yuktaha Kadhamsa Purushaiti. Therefore, the total negation of any activity like killing or being killed, all this, that is, all activities denied in Atman, that is Akshebartha. That's a real meaning of Kadhamsa Purusha Partha Kam Ghadayeti Khantikam. It is not Prasnartha, it is not in the form of a question, but rather it is in the form of a total negation of any possibility of any action. So that is the conclusion. Then there is a very important discussion about a very important subject. Why Atma is then called Vidwan? So why do we call Atma the Vidwan, the knower? So if you call Atman the knower, that would imply the role of Atman as the one who knows and something that is known and the process of knowledge. When you talk about Atman as Vidwan, the knower, the enlightened one, then it implies that there is something that Atman comes to know of, and Atman itself is the knower. And there is a process of knowing the known, that is the process of, that is knowledge. So there is a very important discussion on this subject. So the central point is this: the normal conventional usage, that is, when we use the word we know something at empirical level due to the avidya, or when we use the word vidwan in the spiritual sense that we become an enlightened one, both are two forms of buddhivritti. One is vidya, the other is avidya. So it resembles a statement that comes in another script, another context. Nahi brahmanaha avikriyasya vidyalakshana sukriya vikriya bhavidum arhati. So Atman or Brahman cannot be limited to a buddhivritti. So any kind of knowledge, even the knowledge of Brahman, even the knowledge of the absolute reality, is a kind of buddhivritti. The knowledge of empirical things is related to buddhivritti associated with avidya. The knowledge of Brahman is associated with the buddhivritti associated with vidya. And true reality, the Atman, is beyond both buddhivritti associated with avidya and buddhivritti associated with vidya. It is beyond both vidya and avidya. So that point is established here. Maybe before proceeding further, I can explain this in the light of a very interesting, very simple example from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Siddhartha says, suppose a thorn is thrust into your flesh, in the body. Suppose a thorn, a sharp thorn has been thrust into a part of your body. So you want to get it out of it. You may have to use some needle, or you may have to use another thorn to get rid of the thorn. So after using the second thorn to remove the one that is already pierced through the skin, you throw away both the thorns. You don't retain the one which you used to remove the thorn that has been pierced to the flesh. Similarly, when there is a piece of rope in the room which you mistake to be a snake due to lack of enough light, when you bring light from outside, or when you open the doors and windows, the light helps you to have a clear look at the object which you by mistake mistook to be a snake. When there is enough light, you realize that it is not a snake but just a piece of rope. Sorry, when we bring light, the darkness is removed, and the darkness is removed, the reality is self-revealed, and the reality is that it is just a piece of rope. Now the realization that it is a piece of rope is not a direct result of opening the windows or switching on the light. Even if you don't open the window, even if you do not switch on the light, still the rope will be a rope. But the wrong notion is removed. The wrong notion that it is not a rope but a snake, that's a wrong notion. And the right notion is that it is a rope, not a snake. So the right notion, the right understanding is helped by removal of darkness, which is the effect of bringing light or opening the doors and windows. After that, the role of light, the role of the lamp that you brought into the room is not very important, because the fact is clear that it is a piece of rope. That's why Shankaracharya says, Shastrantu ajnana nivartakam na jnana pravartakam. The absolute aparokshanubhuti, our realization of our true nature, is not a result of any scriptural knowledge. But scriptural knowledge gives us the right notion, which helps us to remove the wrong notion. The scriptural knowledge plays the role of a thorn with which we remove the other thorn which has pierced into the flesh of our body. So that's a very important point, remember. That's why, according to Vedanta, Vidya as a buddhivritti is also to be transcended. The absolute experience, aparokshanubhuti, the inner spiritual realization, is beyond both Vidya and Avidya. We have to transcend both Vidya and Avidya. Vidya helps us to get rid of Avidya, and once we get established in Vidya, then transcending Vidya is a natural process. So the purpose of Vidya is to remove Avidya, and when Avidya goes away, Vidya also goes away. When Avidya disappears, the Vidya also disappears. The philosophical conviction that Aham Brahmasmi also becomes irrelevant when we reach the experience of Aham Brahmasmi. As we discussed in the last session, when we are discussing the statement of the Brahma Sutras. So that's why Yatha Buddhya the Akridasya Sabdharthasya Avikriya eva san Buddhi Vritya Viveka Vijnanena Vidya Uvalabdha Atma Kalpyate. So just because the Atman is reflecting in Buddhi Vritti at empirical level, so by mistake we use the conventional language. Well, I am seeing this, I am doing this, I am knowing these things, etc. In the same manner, by means of Atma Anatma Viveka, that is the means of higher spiritual discrimination or higher spiritual conviction, through intellectual pursuit, we realize the reality of Atman. But that intellectual pursuit, assisted by Vidya Vritti, also is, in the ultimate analysis, unreal, because the absolute reality, that is the aparokshanambhuti, the inner spiritual experience, is beyond both Vidyavritti and also Avidyavritti. When we depend upon Avidyavritti, we often say, I am seeing this, I am seeing a river, I am seeing a mountain, I am going through all these experiences, pain and pleasure, happiness and unhappiness, and so on. When we depend upon Vidyavritti, then through Shastrajnanam, through contemplation, through proper intellectual understanding of the true meaning of scriptures, we come to the conclusion of the reality that Atman is only absolute real truth. But that conviction itself is to be transcended. That conviction is related to Vidyavritti. Vidya also is to be transcended to reach experience. Experience is beyond Vidyavritti and also Avidyavritti. So the intellectual or the theological, the philosophical significance of this statement is no amount of philosophical conviction, no amount of philosophical speculation, even of the right kind of philosophical speculation, is equal to experience. Experience is beyond even the right understanding of scriptures. The right understanding of scriptures helps us to get rid of the wrong understanding of scriptures. Vidyavritti helps us to get rid of Avidyavritti. But once Avidya is gone, Vidya has fulfilled its mission, its purpose. Then for a spiritual seeker, as he evolves from Vidyavritti, as he transcends Vidyavritti, as he realizes the reality, as we reach the experience level of Vidyavritti, then Vidyavritti as an intellectual conviction of the scriptural truths also goes away. So the ultimate aparokshanabhuti is beyond even proper scriptural understanding. It is beyond words. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. This is Taittiriya. So this statement is there. Evameva atma anatma vivekajnanena buddhivrittiya vidyaya asatyarupaya eva paramarthadaha abhikriya eva atma vidwan uchyate. So when we use the word vidwan, a person who has understood the scriptural truth, it is only a relative statement. It is not incorrect, but it is not the ultimate statement. It is only an empirical statement. So Bhashyam says, even through sadhana sadhushtaya sampatti, even through proper study of scriptures, proper understanding the meaning of the great Vedic statements, when we reach the experience level, then we transcend, we go beyond the intellectual conviction of the absolute reality. When we reach the experience dimension of the absolute reality, we leave behind the intellectual, the philosophical dimension of the absolute reality. That point is mentioned here. Vidushaha karma asambhava vajanat yani karmani shastrena vidhiyante tani avidusho vikhidani iti bhagavado nischaya avagamyate. This is a very famous statement from the philosophical perspective. So we already established that even the word vidwan in the context of Atman itself is a relative statement. Now Bhashyam says, wherever in the scriptures, either in the smrtis or srutis, wherever there is a statement which talks about any kind of karmas, any kind of srauda or smarta karmas. Those karmas are essentially meant for avidwan. Avidwan here means a person who has not reached the highest spiritual experience. So, another important point is the word karma here always means the formal ritualistic sacrifices, the formal rituals and ceremonies enjoined in the srauda or smarta text. That's the real meaning here. That's why it is clearly stated in some of the statements, Yani karmani agnihotraadini shastre vidhyante. Now what are these karmas? That's what we have to discuss now. So normally in our tradition there are different types of yajnas and yagas which is mentioned in the Vedantic scriptures, in the Vedic scriptures. According to Mimamsakas, the central theme of Vedic text is to realize dharma, and the means to realize this dharma is performance of yajnas and yagas and different Vedic rituals, nitya karmas, naimittika karmas, soma yajnas or saptahavir yajnas. Through the performance of these karmas, one accumulates some spiritual merit, and the strength of that spiritual merit, a person will go to heaven. Every such Vedic ritual will produce an invisible result, residue. It's called apurvam or adrishtam. It is not seen, not visible. In that sense, it is called adrishtam. It did not exist before the sacrificer or the Mimamsaka performs that ritual, so it is called apurva. So there are, in fact, there are 40 samskaras which called nitya naimitya karmas, between these srauda or smarta karmas. Altogether, the srauda karmas are, for example, ajnadhanam, agnihotram, that is daily fire ritual, dasapurnamasa, agrahayanam, chaturmasyam, the niruddha pashubantha, sautramani. These are some of the srauda karmas which are enjoined in the srauda, in the Sruti literature. Then there are, of course, some kind of smarta karmas which are also, for example, the paga yajnas like ashtaga, sthali paga, parvana, sravani, etc. And then soma yajnas we already mentioned, which is Srauda tradition, agnistoma, agnitishtoma, utya, shodasi, vachapeya, soma yajna, etc. Then there is adhiratra, aptoryama, and so on. So there are a large number of srauda and smarta karmas which are enjoined in the scriptures. The purpose of these karmas, these sacrifices, these rituals, is to enable a mimamsaka, a sacrificer, to reach heaven. And after living for long years in heaven, the sacrificer returns to this world to be born again and continues this performance of yajnas and yagas. Heaven in the Mimamsaka sense is qualitatively different from heaven as understood in the Abrahamic tradition. Heaven in the Mimamsaka tradition is just an experience of more or less celestial and worldly pleasures for a very long time. And Shankaracharya says that these yajnas and yagas, these rituals are okay only for those who do not want the highest spiritual realization. Those who are advanced spiritual seekers and not interested in going to heaven or enjoying heavenly pleasures, they need not at all worry about performing any of these srauda or smarta rituals. So the injunctions, the vidhis, the Vidhivakyas, which enjoins these rituals, are only meant for those who are not interested in the higher spiritual pursuit of the Shreyasa, or those who are not interested in Atma Jnanam. Those who are interested in Atma Jnanam, they do not have to worry about these rituals. This is the central teachings of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya doesn't deny these karmas. He says these karmas are perfectly okay. But you should not look upon these karmas are universal or mandatory for all people. So that's an important point to remember. That's why Madhusudana says, Ata eva sarvani shastrani avidyut adhikarigani. So all these karmas and rituals, which are kamya karmas, which are karmas to be performed if you want to achieve certain things, or nitya karmas, karmas that you should perform because if you don't perform, you will incur sin. All these karmas are totally irrelevant if you are a seeker of the highest spiritual truth, if you are a seeker of Brahma Vidya. So, the Anandagiri explains this. Atmani karta bhokta ittevam vijnanavatve api brahmajnana vihinatvena avidushaha anushteyam karma ityarthaha. So, brahmajnana vihinatvena. Here, those who do not have brahmajnanam, the highest spiritual realization, and those who do not want this highest spiritual realization, they look upon themselves as fit for performing these rituals because they want to enjoy the results of performance of these rituals. Swargagamo yacheta. When such a person finds a statement in the Mimamsa text, those who want to go to Swarga, those who want to enjoy heavenly pleasures, should perform a ritual. So, the desire to enjoy heavenly pleasures and the ability, the financial ability and other, the availability of the necessary equipment, necessary things will perhaps enable a person to think, well, I should perform a yajna, I should perform a ritual so that I can go to heaven. So, the desire of the person to enjoy heavenly pleasures and the availability of the necessary means at his disposal, and again the understanding of a scriptural statement that if he wants to go to heaven and enjoy heavenly pleasures, he can perform this ritual. These factors together will make a person perform these rituals. But it is only meant for those who do not want to go beyond the empirical plane, those who do not want the highest spiritual experience. So that's the essential meaning of the statement, Vidushaka karma sambhavajanat. A jnani who may not have any desire for any of the yajnas and yagas, who have experienced the highest spiritual truth, for such a person, such rituals are totally impossible and irrelevant. Yani karmani shastrena vidhiyante tani avidusho vikidani. So only an avidwan will consider these vidhivakyas as mandatory. Iti bhagavado nishchaya avagamyate. So the discussion continues. Here Purvapakshi asks one question. Nanu vidya api avidusho eva vidhiyate. Vidhita vidyasya pishtapeshanavat vidya vidhanarthakyat. Tatra avidushara karmani vidhiyande na vidusha iti vishesho novavadyate. So Purvapakshi says, if you say that the karmas, that is all these Vedic rituals, are meant only for an avidwan, for a person who doesn't have Brahmajnanam and who doesn't want to have Brahmajnanam, if all these rituals, Vedic rituals, are prescribed only for such a person, then you have to admit that Vidya also is meant for such a person. Vidya is not prescribed for a Vidwan because Vidwan already has got Vidya. So why should a Vidwan be taught Vidya? Why should a person who knows everything be taught knowledge? There is no need. That's a opposite argument, an objection raised by the Purvapakshi, by the Mimamsakas. He says, if karma or rituals are meant only for avidwan, karmani avidusho vihidani, you made such a statement. All these rituals, karmas are prescribed only for avidwan, for those who are ignorant, those who are not endowed with the highest spiritual realization. They are the people who are supposed to perform these rituals. Karmas are meant for them. In that case, Vidya also is meant for them. Why? Because a Vidwan doesn't need Vidya. So, in fact, if you prescribe Vidya for a Vidwan, it's just like grinding a corn that's already ground. Vishtapeshanavat. Suppose you take corn or any grain, you grind it to powder, and again you go on grinding even after it has become fully powdered. If it has become powder, still you go on grinding a powder. So it's totally a waste of effort to teach knowledge to a knowledgeable person, who is a learned person. To teach Vidya, to prescribe Vidya for a Vidwan is as meaningless as go on pounding or grinding corn or any grain that is already ground properly. So that's why Vishtapeshanavet Vidya Vidhana Anarthakyat. So Avidushaka Karmani Vidhiyante. It's already stated. All rituals are meant for avidwan, for those who do not have the highest spiritual realization, those who do not want the highest spiritual realization, and who want to go to Swarga, who want to enjoy comforts in this world and also enjoy comforts in heaven. For such people, Vedic rituals are prescribed. Okay, we understand, we admit that. Then what's the use of prescribing Vidya, the highest spiritual knowledge, for those who have already known the reality? So that also should be for avidwan. That's the false argument, Purvapakshi's argument. Tatra avidushaka karmani vidhiyante na vidusha iti vishesho na upapaddhiti. And as said, the view that karmas have been laid down, prescribed for ordinary people who do not have the spiritual realization and not for Vidya, such a statement doesn't hold good, because Vidya is meant for those who do not have Vidya and Avidwan. So Vidya also should be meant for Avidwan. That's the argument of the Purvapakshi. So he says, on the strength of this argument, your view, the rituals are meant only for Avidwan, is not tenable. It falls to the ground. That's the objection. Here, Bhashyakara brings out a very important principle. Na anushteyasya bhava vishesho vapattehi. No. Your argument is totally wrong, Bhashyakara says. Anushteyasya bhava vishesho vapattehi. No, your objection is certainly not acceptable. What's the reason? Because there is an essence, there is a fundamental difference between the essential and non-essential. I mean, the point is, karma jnana, there is an anushteyatva. I mean, there is a difference as to for whom this particular ritual becomes mandatory, necessary, desirable or not. That is Adhyatma Vidya. So the central statement I shall try to summarize before taking up the Bhashyam. Bhashyakara is going to introduce a very important point. Suppose a person, normally they are householders who want to make a lot of money, who want to enjoy. So after making a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of reputation, good job, plenty of money in the bank, now they may think of, well, when I die, I won't take this wealth with me. So what is going to happen to me after death? So this worry about the inevitability of death and inevitable disappearance, non-availability of all this accumulated wealth after death, this will be striking. So he will start thinking, well, I should do something so that I will be able to enjoy life even after death. So he may try to build up a capital that will benefit him even after death. So he may read scriptures, and in scriptures he may find a statement. Well, those who want to go to heaven and enjoy life after death, there is a way. Surgagamo yajeda. Those who want to go to heaven and want to enjoy heavenly comforts after death, you perform it. If you are such a person, all right, you perform these Vedic rituals. You can perform Adhyatma, you can perform Somayaga, you can perform any of the Soma Yajnas or Saptahavir Yajnas, Vajapeya, any of these you can perform. That will ensure, that will guarantee your enjoyment even after death. So his desire to enjoy, to continue a pleasant, happy life even after death, and his the availability of the necessary means to perform such rituals will naturally prompt him to perform some Vedic ritual. When he reads in the Vedic text, Surgagamo yajeda, those who want to go to heaven, there is a way to do that. You perform this yajnas, yagas, etc. For such a person, these statements are okay. These Agnihotra-dini, or any of the Srauda karmas, either Saptahavir yajnas or Soma yajnas, any of these yajnas and yagas will be a wonderful thing. Because first of all, he has the means to perform such a ritual. It requires a lot of money, a lot of equipments, a lot of help from other people. And he should know how to do that. He may read the scripture and he may come to know that if he performs such a ritual, he can go to heaven. He can have heavenly pleasures even after death. So these two factors, that is, his desire to go to heaven and knowledge that if he performs such a ritual, he can go to heaven, will prompt him to make the necessary preparations. He needs a lot of money. You have to accumulate a lot of necessary ingredients to perform a Vedic ritual. So naturally, he will be prompted to perform this ritual. But what about an Atmajnani, or what about a person, what about a spiritual seeker, an advanced spiritual seeker, who doesn't care for enjoyments of this world and certainly doesn't care for enjoyments of heaven? Why should such a person worry about performing rituals? If you do not have a job right now, and if you find an advertisement in newspaper, if you don't have a job, if you want a job, and if you have these qualifications, you can apply. So you are qualified and you are in need of a job, and you get the information from a newspaper advertisement that if you apply for this job, you may get that job. So all these together will naturally prompt you to apply for a job because you are in need of a job. But a spiritual seeker, who is an advanced spiritual seeker, who is in pursuit of the highest Brahma Jnanam, he is not worried about any statements that talk about going to heaven. He totally ignores them, or he is beyond them. So there is always a difference of Adhikari Veda. Those for whom these Vedic rituals are desirable, are prescribed in the scriptures, and those for whom they are totally irrelevant. For those advanced spiritual seekers who are looking for the highest spiritual experience, who are meditating, who are doing prayer, who are reading scriptures, who are spending their time in contemplation, for such people, these statements about going to heaven, enjoying comforts in heaven, these statements have totally no value, no relevance. So that is the point Shankaracharya is making here. Now, anushteyasya bhava abhava vishesho upattehi agnihotradi vidyartham jnanotra kalam agnihotradi karma aneka sadhana upasamhara purvakam. Bhashyakara says there is this difference. An ordinary person, a layman, after reading this vidhi statement, this injunction in a Vedic text, and he also comes to know the means to attain these heavenly comforts, and he comes to know of how to perform Agnihotra and other rites. So what will he think? He will naturally go about accumulating those necessary ingredients, making preparations, collecting the necessary ingredients, people to help him. He will have to contact those who will help him, the Udgada, the Adhiryu, the Hota, the Brahman. He will have to contact different priests who will help him in preparing this Yajnavedi, Yajnashala, who will do the necessary Vedic chanting. He will need all these important factors in his favor. Why? Because he thinks karta aham mama kartavyam iti evam prakara vijnanavataha avidushaha. So he is an avidwan because he is not interested in the highest Brahma Jnana. He is interested only in enjoying this world and enjoying worldly comforts in heaven. So naturally, when he reads a statement in the text, he will think, Aham Karta, I am the doer, and it's my duty, Mama Kartavyam. Why does he feel that it is his duty to perform Vedic ritual? Because he wants to go to heaven. He is enjoying life in this world. He is not interested in the pursuit of the highest Brahma Vidya. He is interested only in enjoying comforts. And he wants to enjoy comforts in this world, and he wants to continue enjoying the same comforts in heaven after death. So he says, Aham Karta, Aham Yajna Karta. I am going to be going to perform, I am going to be a sacrificer, I am going to perform the yajna, because Aham Bhokta, I want to enjoy the results of the performance of these Vedic rituals, so it is my duty. Mama Kartavya. Idi nadu tatha na jayate ityadi atmasvarupa vidyartha jnanotra kala bhavi kinjit anushteyam bhavadi. Nadu tatha na jayate. So that is again a reference to the statement we already studied, na jayate mriyate va kadaji nayam bhukta bhavida vana bhuha ajo nitya shasudoyam gurano na hanyade hanyamane sarire. So that statement is there in the Gita. Gita says, this Atman, it is aja, avya, na jayate mriyate va kadajit nayam bhukta bhavida vana bhuya. This Atma is Shadvikara Atida. It is not born, it is birthless, it is deathless, and it is unchanging. It is eternal, immortal reality, and that's my true nature. A Vidwan has already read this in scriptures, and he is going to realize that truth. He wants to realize his immortal nature, Atman, which is birthless and deathless. By performing this Vedic ritual, he is not going to experience that. So when he reads his Vedic statement, Sargagamo, Echeda, etc., if you want to go to heaven, you perform this ritual. These statements have absolutely no meaning for a Vedantin, for a spiritual seeker who is in pursuit of the highest spiritual realization. Because he realizes, he knows that he may not have realized it, or he may have realized it, in either case, he knows that his true nature is Atman, and this Atman is Aja, Avveya, Nitya, Suddha, Buddha, Mukta, Swabhava, and that is his true nature. So once he understands that, he doesn't pay much attention to these Vedic statements about going to heaven. So there is always a difference, a clear distinction and difference between those for whom these Vedic statements about Vedic rituals make sense and those for whom they do not make any sense at all. For the advanced spiritual seekers who realize, who understand that the nature of Atman is that Atman is birthless and deathless, for such great spiritual seekers, these Vedic statements about sacrifices and rituals have absolutely no meaning, no relevance. नतु तथा न जायते इत्यादि आत्मस्वरूप विद्यार्थ ज्ञानोत्तर काल भावी किंचित अनुष्ठेयं भवति. So it doesn't at all occur to this jnani as something to be performed. He may read the scriptures, but for him it makes no sense. Suppose you have already got a good job and a senior job, very satisfactory job, and if you read an advertisement in newspapers calling for candidates for a lower paying job, a job that you don't want, why should you apply for that job? You already got a much better job, so you don't consider it as relevant at all. So like that, a person who doesn't have any desire for going to heaven will not pay attention at all. He will not pay any attention to Vedic statements about karma karmas or yajnas, yagas, sacrifices that will enable you to go to heaven. That's the idea behind. Kintu na aham karta na bhokta ityadi atmaigatva agartruttvadi vishekjnanat anyat na utpadyati iti esha vishesha upapadyati. Kintu, so what is a jnani? For a jnani, he doesn't have any conviction other than the strong conviction that is Naham karta na bhokta. I am not karta, I am not bhokta. Kintu naham karta na bhokta ityadi atmaigatva agartruttvadi vishekjnanat anyat na utpadyate iti esha vishesha upapadyate. For a jnani, for a vidwan, he doesn't have anything other than strong, firm conviction that is neither the doer, the karta, or the bhokta, the enjoyer. That is, the Atma is the one and it is non-doer. Atmaigatva akartruttvadi. So he is fully convinced of the truth that Atman is one, Atmaigatva, and Atmanaha akartrutvam. And he also is fully convinced that Atma is non-doer. And he also realizes that he is not different from that Atman. So for him naturally there is no question of any relevance for Vedic statements about rituals. Iti esha upapadyate. So on the strength of these points, the view given, the statement made earlier is fully acceptable, tenable. Yaha punaha kartaham iti veti atmanam tasya mama idam kartavyam iti avasya bhavini buddhi syat tadapekshaya saha adhikriyate iti tam prati karmani saja vidwan ubhau tau navijanitaha iti vajanat. Now what about those who may read these Vedic statements and immediately he may think, well, I am the doer. Yapunaha arthaham idiveti atmanam tasya mama idam kartavyam. He thinks is aham karta mama idam kartavyam. When he reads a Vedic statement, which is an injunction meant for those who want to go to heaven and enjoy heavenly comforts, because he has a desire for it. And because he has a desire for it, he considers a statement which reveals a particular ritual as a means for going to heaven as something very relevant and very binding to him. So what happens? He considers, well, this I am the karta and I am going, this particular karma, this particular Vedic ritual is mama kartavyam. Iti avasyam bhavini buddhi syat. Naturally, if a person, if an individual is always desirous of enjoying comforts in this world, always contemplating and thinking that money, wealth, status, all these are eternal, they will bring eternal peace and happiness and satisfaction. That person may naturally think that, well, after death, these things won't be available, but I want to enjoy the same comforts even after death. So naturally, that will be his buddhi. Tadabhekshaya sadhikriyade iditam praidi karmani. If such a person reads these Vedic statements, then naturally it becomes binding. He considers it's very important for him, very relevant to him. He thinks it is meant for him. Again, I have to remind one important point. When we talk about heaven in Mimamsa tradition, which is what we are doing right now, we should remember heaven in the Mimamsa tradition is totally different from heaven as understood in the Abrahamic religious traditions. Heaven in the Christian tradition or in the Jewish tradition is not just a place for enjoyment. There is a spiritual element. You are in close proximity with God, with angels. So it is a spiritual attainment going to heaven according to Abrahamic traditions. But according to Mimamsakas, heaven is a kind of Epicurean, bohemian, utilitarian state where you go on enjoying all wonderful comforts. Not for a long time. Depending upon the merit of Vedic rituals you have performed in this world, in this life, you will be able to enjoy these heavenly comforts for a long time, depending upon the amount of Vedic rituals, the number of Vedic rituals you may have performed in this life. And once the merit of these performances of Vedic rituals is exhausted, you are born again in this world. Lord Krishna said, so, Kshene Punne Martya Lokam Vishanti. It's called Punya, means the meritorious results of performing Vedic rituals. So there is nothing spiritual about it. In fact, there is a very interesting historical aspect about this argument. When Shankaracharya was when Shankaracharya was writing this commentary on the Gita, that is 8th century, the Mimamskas had become very strong. The followers of Kumarila Bhatta and Prabhagana, the two schools of Mimamsa, have become very strong. There was a long intellectual dialectical confrontation between the Buddhists who, of course, were already gone a long distance. They moved away from Buddha's original teachings. So Buddhism had become some kind of a nihilism or anarchism, intellectual anarchism, a kind of negative, all-negating doctrine. So Kumarila and Prabhagara, the two great Mimamsakas, appeared in the 5th and maybe 4th, 5th centuries, and they argued with Mimamsakas, and they won most of the debates against Buddhists. And so what happened? They won the field for the Mimamsa tradition. So Vedic ritualism was projected as a central teachings of the whole Vedic literature by these two schools of Mimamsakas, both Prabhagaras and Bhattas. After their long intellectual dialectical confrontation with Buddhists who propagated kind of negative, nihilistic intellectual anarchism in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Mimamsakas had already won the field of argument, and they projected a view that the central theme of Vedic literature was performance of these rituals and Vedic sacrifices. They did not accept the higher Vedantic philosophy of the Upanishads, and they did not accept any of the Mahavakyas as of any significance, or they misinterpreted all those important Vedantic statements as subsidiary to statements which only talked about rituals. Or they just dismissed the higher Vedantic teachings of the Vedas as Arthavadas. That was what the Mimamsakas did under Prabhagara and Kumarila Bhatta. So when Shankaracharya came in 8th century, his main task was to save Vedantic tradition from the stranglehold of Mimamsakas, who denied any Vedantic teaching in Vedic literature, or just looked upon Vedantic statements as subsidiary, or just eulogies, statements of second category, or just statements praising some Vedic rituals. So Shankaracharya's main task was to bring back the ancient Vedantic teachings, and for that he had to write books in which he refuted the views of the Mimamsakas, and he also held a lot of discussions and debates with the Mimamsakas. He defeated them. One of the most prominent of the Mimamsaka leaders was Mandana, who was a disciple of Kumarila Bhatta, who later became his own sannyasi disciple, Shankaracharya. So when Shankaracharya writes about karma, he is using the word karma in the same sense in which the Mimamsakas were using the word karma. It is not the same sense in which the word karma was used by Lord Krishna in the 3rd millennium BC when he preached Bhagavad Gita. So if you read Bhagavad Gita, especially the 3rd chapter, the word karma has got a very universal dimension. Whatever you do, intellectually, verbally, mentally, psychologically, whatever you do, thought, deed or anything, all these are karmas and all should be elevated to a spiritual practice. This idea was later on brought back by Swami Vivekananda in 19th century as practical Vedanta. So one should always keep in mind, when Shankaracharya uses the word karma as something, as Vedic ritual which is irrelevant for a seeker of truth, highest spiritual truth, we should keep this in mind. He was using the word karma in the same limited sense in which the Mimamsakas were using. And what's the meaning of karma according to Mimamsakas? Rituals, ceremonies performed with a definite purpose, either for enjoyments in this world or enjoyments in afterlife. So that should be always kept in mind. So when Shankaracharya uses the word, the karma is only meant for avidwan, the ignorant one. What he says is this: these external Vedic rituals, which are just mechanical practices with a definite purpose, with a selfish motive, that is enjoyment of life in this world and enjoyment of life after death. These kind of rituals are not meant for the highest seeker of truth, spiritual truth. It is only meant for those who are ignorant of the true purpose of human existence. That's the point to be kept in mind. Yappunaha kartaham iti veti atmanam tasya mama idam kartavyam iti avasyam bhavini buddhi siyat. So, if a person thinks, I am going to perform this yajna, this yaga, this ritual, because I want more comforts, I want more wealth, and I want to enjoy comforts and wealth even in heaven after my death. For such a person, when he reads his Vedic statements, injunctions about sacrifices and rituals, he will think, well, aham karta, I am the doer, and I am going, this is my duty. Mama idam kartavyam iti avasyam bhavini buddhi siyat. Tad abekshaya saha adhikriyate iti tam praiti karmani. Therefore he thinks, well, this is meant for me. I am adhikari for these karmas. Because he has a desire to enjoy all the results of these karmas. So he becomes an adhikari. So, saja vidwan ubhau tau navijanitaha. So, ubhau tau navijanitaha. So, people who think aham karta or mama idam kartavyam, those who believe that my actions, my deeds will, I am the doer, this is my duty, I am the one going to kill, I am the one going to be killed, all this. Those who identify themselves with what they do and also the result of what they are doing. Those who identify themselves with whatever they are doing and those who identify themselves with the enjoyer of the results of their actions, such people do not know. Bhautau navijanitaha nayam khantina hanyate. So the statement from the Gita sloka is repeated here. Visheshadasya cha vidushaka karma apeksha vachanat. So that therefore this kam ghatahedi hantikam, that particular statement should be taken as a total refutation, denial of any action, any duty on the part of a Brahmajnani. That's the understanding. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.